Hi, everyone. Welcome to another week with the Tulsa World Opinion section. I am Ginnie Graham, the editorials editor.
I am Bob Doucette, an editorial writer.
And we've got a busy week, if not a fun week, but a lot happening in Ukraine. The big story, and it finally happened. We were expecting it. We wrote an editorial this morning that we're basically calling on a one America, that we've been so divided for so long that this does seem to be the moment that that our leaders are going to have to dissolve their differences and realize we have this shared values of democracy that since World War II made promises to defend the European Union against this Russian communist encroachment. And I think that's going to have to be a theme we come back to, because it seems like we forget that we do have shared values. And what was interesting was, Bob, you're already working on a column about Ukraine and what it means to America before the invasion. So,
right.
What kind of hit the highlights of what's in your Sunday column about, sort of the 2 points you really wanted to hammer home?
Well, the things that I was thinking about with this was, when I wrote it, I didn't want to get too big into the speculation of how a war would go down, but I did, because we're going to have a lot of that in the paper anyway, and a lot of that's on TV. So my thinking was, how is this going to affect us here at home? So a few things that stuck out to me, just to go over it really quick, and some of this is sort of like, yeah, we know this is coming, but we're going to feel some pain from this for sure. We're going to feel it at the pump. Russia is a major producer of oil and gas. The way the oil and gas market works is very global. And when you have a country who is now suddenly going to have trouble selling their stuff on the global market, which is very likely in the near future, that's going to put a pinch on supplies. And anytime you have a supply decrease or problems delivering it, prices go up. So you're going to feel that in your bills, and you're going to feel that at the pump, as if it wasn't already expensive enough as it is. Well, prepare for that. On the flip side with that, and I look back when I wrote this, it's like, man, I hate to talk about like silver linings or whatever in light of what's happening to the Ukrainian people, but I figured it was worth talking about, just because of what an energy heavy state we are. If you're an oil and gas producer, $100 a barrel, $4 per unit in gas, stuff like that, if those prices go up, that's definitely going to benefit producers. And we've already seen a trend of more drilling, more production domestically. Even as prices have continued to increase, we're going to see more of that. So places that are going to be more marginal producers, those places are going to be profitable now. So you're going to see a lot more of that. People are crying for energy independence. Well, I don't know if we'll ever have that, but you're going to see a lot more domestic production. The second thing that I saw is, if you remember back in the spring, we discovered a ransomware attack in the city of Tulsa. And it was largely attributed to a group called Conti, a Russia-based cybercrime group. Interesting thing about these cyber criminal groups is a lot of them are in Russia, and a lot of them have the tacit approval of the Russian government to do what they do. And sometimes they are hired to do what they do, to disrupt Western nations and other governments and other societies where they think they can find an advantage there. So I think we can see more cyber criminal activity, more cyber warfare type of stuff, more hacking incidents happen here in the United States. I don't know how robust our defenses are, particularly things that are sensitive like power grids and stuff like that, but that risk just went way up, whether that comes from cyber criminal groups or the Russian government itself. We're going to see more of that as they retaliate for the sanctions that are being levied on them now. And then the third thing that I think we're going to see, this is a kind of an offshoot of cyber warfare that goes into the information warfare side. The Russians have been extremely active in disinformation. That is something that goes back way back into the Soviet era, but now they have all kinds of new outlets to carry that out, particularly with social media, with television, and with internet news or propaganda sites and stuff like that. They have a lot of buttons that they can still push with that. So you're going to see probably a heavier flood of not just disinformation, but things that make people mad, people that make things mad at each other, the type of divisiveness that we've seen through social media, through Facebook and Twitter and all the other social media platforms from the elections that we've had, the last two big presidential elections. Expect that to ramp up. So my caution with that, and it has been for years, watch the sources of information where you take stuff in. You need to vet this stuff very closely, because there's a lot of junk that's going to be coming our way, and we're going to need to be wise in what we believe is true and what we know is going to be false.
Well, and that's what I talk about, a one America. And
Yeah.
there's already, you see, and I won't even say his name, but a conservative host that said he'd rather be a Russian than a Democrat. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I'm like, these are foreign agents who are bent on hurting us, harming our economy, harming our people, and harming their people. And so, I think that we have to sort of hold those people accountable, that know that we have these shared values, and the more that we, and it helps to divide people, doesn't it? I mean, it's enemies look for the weakness, and if the weakness is, we're fighting over a book, then that's what they're going to seize on. They're going to seize on those things. And so I do think we need to be a lot more cautious, but also I have found that there are people since, 2016, since that election, that they're just tuning out. Yeah. And there are some reports, and our editorial on Sunday talks about that, which is, so many people say, I'm just not going to watch any news. I'm just out. And there's a harm with that too, because if you don't, the power then has unchecked power, that if you're not willing to sort that out and just ask the question or know where you're getting your sources, then you're ignorant of not only what's happening internationally, but you're going to stay ignorant of what's happening at your city council, at your school boards, at your county commission. And so I think that we have to encourage people to stay engaged, but it's okay. But, question it, know where you're getting it. And the people say they don't know what's facts. I think you can figure out what's facts.
Oh yeah.
This is a new phenomena, and, and I think younger kids are better at it than older people. Like, my kids are very discerning of what
they sure can be. They sure can be.
Yeah. So, and this isn't this weird transition, but going back to Ukraine, my son turned 18 about a couple months ago. And this week he got his selective service forms. Mm-hmm. This is a kid who's never really paid much attention to international news. All of a sudden he is all over this Ukraine story.
Paying attention now.
Oh, he's got friends who are going into the military, and he's been, of course they all had the recruitment things, but he's real worried. I mean, he's like, so he's asking questions. How likely is the draft? How likely is this? And even though we're coming off a 20-year war, I think whenever anything new starts up, and it is exhausting that we can't have prolonged peace in the world.
Yes.
But it does bring all that home, that, we're sending troops over to the NATO territories, not necessarily Ukraine, but I just have a feeling Putin's in this for the long run. And so we don't know what's going to happen. But I do think there's a lot of need for those STEM jobs. Like you're talking about cyber warfare. I think we need a lot more of our young people to go into that kind of work, cybersecurity and those kind of jobs, because I think that's where the next frontier of warfare lies.
It's a big component of it. Mm-hmm. And I am interested in seeing if we do come under more of that kind of an attack, a concerted effort against us. We have some things at our disposal that we've been pretty conservative with over the years. How that gets unleashed if things get hotter, I don't know. Mm-hmm. Going back to what you were talking about into why people should be engaged, and this is the theme that's been hitting me throughout the events of the last few days this week in Ukraine. Ukraine, for all its faults, is a democratic country, and they have a right to self-determination. And they are trying to model themselves to be a free society like us. And you have a bigger, stronger, more powerful neighbor saying, nope, we don't want you to do that. We want you to do what we told you to do, and we're willing to break your country over a rock to make that happen. And now we're starting to see threats being levied against other countries that might be thinking about wanting to partner with NATO. So that was something that came out today, is the Russian government basically warning Finland and Sweden, don't even think about going to NATO, or there'll be military and other repercussions for you. What we're facing right now with this is we've had plenty of wars over the years since World War II. Sometimes very bloody ones, you know, Vietnam and Korea and such like that. Sometimes really long ones like Iraq and Afghanistan. But what we haven't had is the possibility of this great titanic struggle that you have right now in Europe. That's the big difference right now when it comes to war, is when you're talking about war in X part of the world, that's one thing. When you're talking about war in Europe, it's different. And the reason why it's different is because, you know, for starters, some really big economies in that area, but the specter of the Cold War that has appeared again is the nuclear question. It's not just the Russians, it's not just us, but it's also the British, and there are other nuclear powers involved here. This is where it gets spooky, and we have somebody who seems much more willing to exert his will through military power than any of us truly thought was possible. That's why we got to pay attention, because this has to get resolved soon before it spins out of control. And that is why we need to be, to your point, more of a united country on this thing. We can't be fussing around with this junk anymore. There's real stuff happening right now, and we got to pay attention, and we got to come together.
Well, and along those lines, we're losing a longtime voice in our congressional delegation with Senator Jim Mountain Inhofe, and that is actually his middle name, retiring. And
learned something new today.
I think the same day. And so he, and I think it's just for personal reasons. He spent 35 years in Congress, and you know, and Senator Inhofe has been, he certainly knows how to get attention, but I will say, in defending him, he has been a highly effective advocate for Oklahoma. We would not have the highways and the infrastructure without him. I mean, he brings a lot of that highway money, infrastructure money home. I mean, we can
military money too.
Yes, I mean,
whenever they had base closure,
he has definitely
stuff like that. He was fighting his rear end off for Tinker and Altus and Vance.
He's been a huge backer, I mean, of our economy. I mean, I think that he has saved several of those bases from cuts and closures and all sorts of things. So, but in the wake of any kind of big time resignation like that, there's a scramble for who's going to take the place. And this morning, he announced that he's backing his chief of staff, Luke Holland, who's not in public office, but he's backing him in a special election to replace him. And interestingly, that the timing of this is that we are going to have an election to replace them. That this is not, it used to be the new law went into place that we, based on this timing, we're going to have an election instead of a governor's appointment. And so the other names were mentioned. Now, Kevin Hearn, Congressman Kevin Hearn, and Congressman Markwayne Mullin have both expressed interest in the past. Congressman Hearn certainly has the funding for that kind of race. Markwayne Mullin, you know, name recognition. And if that happens, then those open up congressional seats. I mean, it's all this chessboard of things. And you have Senate President Pro Tem Greg Treat and House Speaker Charles McCall that are both, I believe, term limited. And looking like
on a job.
Where's their next move? Yeah, I mean, Senator Treat certainly has been proposing some bills that indicate he's trying to mobilize the right base.
Mhm.
So the question is there a Democrat who possibly could have a chance? I can't think of one.
Ooh. Yeah, that's a really tall hill to climb right now for any Democrat in the state, for sure. It would seem, I mean, when I started thinking about this, it's like, all right, in a general election, who might show up on the Democratic side? And, first I kind of went back to one of those old favorites with Drew Edmondson, but I have a feeling that's probably not going to happen.
No.
But one person that popped up was Kendra Horn. The person who lost her reelection bid at the 5th Congressional District to Stephanie Bice.
And then they quickly broke that congressional district up.
Yeah, we
can't have a purple district.
We don't want to be Kendra again.
Oh no, we can't possibly have another party get in there.
One person I think who is definitely not going to be
Abby Broyles.
Yeah,
Abby. She's had some personal problems.
Yeah, she's had a rough go the last week or two.
I know. But going back to this idea of having someone on, one of the things the Republicans, when the Democrats had the supermajority that it had for decades, the Republican Party started making sure that every race had a Republican to vote for, that they ensured that that voters had a choice, even if it was a long shot, didn't have a chance choice. The Republican Party during those times, at least when they started mobilizing power, they made sure there was someone to vote for. And I would hope that the Democrats are getting it together enough to do that it's important, even if it's a long shot, that it's important voters have a choice, because there's nothing worse than not everything's being decided in the primary, and then you're leaving out, a portion of the state. And so I would hope that there's someone, even if it is a long shot.
They've got somebody who's running right now who plans to run against James Lankford. I was curious with the people on the Republican side running against Lankford, if they might be thinking, instead of having to battle an incumbent, why not file for this seat and do that instead? Because that would be a much easier path. Because I mean, let's just be honest. No one's come out of the Republican field that's going to beat Lankford. It's not going to happen.
Right.
But if it's a wide open primary, that might change things a little bit, depending on who does it on the other side. I think you mentioned some pretty strong contenders. I think if, Mullen or Hearn, for sure, they've got all the name recognition and conservative cred that you could possibly want. Of course, getting the nod from your former boss, your current boss, if Luke Holland does that carries a little bit of weight. But I still got to think that an open primary might be a little bit of an easier road than something like running against an incumbent. But there's a lot of fun little parlor games in this. Of course, when Inhofe does retire, James Lankford becomes the senior senator. That may possibly mean that more avenues for advancement within the Senate GOP caucus rise for him. So he might become a big dog in the future, something more than just a voice that's out there. He might actually be carrying some real weight.
And there's also, Mayor G.T. Bynum's in that mix too, the name.
And he's got a pack.
He's got a pack.
He's got a pack.
He does have a pack. But as for municipal, but
they could change that, right?
But David Holt in Oklahoma City is very popular, but he has at one point he came in a few years ago to the Ed board, and we asked him, "What's your statewide?" He said he would not. He's convinced he wouldn't win statewide because he's been a big critic of Donald Trump, and this was back when Donald Trump was serving, and he's, I believe, a Republican. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
And so he's been one of the few Republicans that just it's not his thing. And so he said, and he's right because of that. In the rural areas where Trump experiences a lot of support in Oklahoma, he said, I wouldn't be able to win statewide. And he was just happy being the very popular Oklahoma City mayor. So I think
take a look at another thing with that too. What happened to the last Oklahoma City mayor who ran for a big statewide office?
Exactly.
Oh, okay,
So,
yeah,
so the rural areas still hold quite a bit of sway in
they
that.
do.
So, and so in the spirit, we have the handshake debate. We have
Yeah.
a couple of bad, or a few bad games where the handshake afterwards went wrong.
Mhm.
And I know that that's been the big discussion in sports. And I think our ed board was pretty quick to say, no, we have so much incivility already that we cannot get rid of these things that hopefully are our traditions of making sure there is good sportsmanship, that sports reflects so much of our culture that, it's almost like we wish we could make the politicians at the end of the race go and hug it out, like, come on.
Yeah.
And that's what athletes are supposed to do. They're supposed to, be good losers, good game, and go on. And there's a lesson there, and we can't let go of that. We can't carve out more exceptions in our society to be mean to each other.
I always figured that if you have something crop up, but it's not this huge thing, and then you say, okay, we're going to get this giant solution to this small problem, you're doing it wrong.
Mhm.
It's kind of like saying, all right, I need to put this little tack hammer in the wall so I can hang my tiny little picture. Where's my 10-pound sledgehammer? I'm going to go get it.
Mhm.
That's kind of what it sounds like. We're just nuking a tradition from orbit
Right.
because
For something that
we had a bad
is,
rash of stuff. I don't know.
it's not like it's a widespread problem, but it's something I think sports can lead on to show, hey,
Yeah.
we have to be able to lose gracefully in these things,
It's a teachable moment.
It's definitely, and it reminds me of when John Waldron, who's representative right now, ran against Dave Rader for the state Senate seat. And the next day it was a contentious election, but they behaved like, gentlemen in the race. But the next day after he lost to Dave Rader, they went out to breakfast. They had a selfie, took a picture, and said, this is what statesmanship looks like. And I just always, that stuck with me and appreciated it, because that was not happening at the time, that you didn't see people of different parties coming together at the end and saying, you know what, good race. Let's share a meal. We'll talk about things and move on. I mean, we need more of those moments. And I think that sports could remind us of that.
Most definitely.
Yeah. So we're back at the weekly topics that won't go away. We talked about sweating the small stuff. Man, do we sweat small stuff sometimes in Oklahoma.
Yes, we do.
But one of the things that, I sort of, one thing that's not so small, it's actually kind of serious, which is McGirt. McGirt doesn't go away. And this week, or last week, I believe, and it was inevitable that there would be a filing wanting to extend McGirt to taxation. That McGirt itself, that Supreme Court ruling just addressed criminality. That instead of trying criminals in state court, we now try a certain number of criminals in federal and tribal. So now there's a question of, can that be extended to taxation? Because if the reservations were not disestablished, then why does the state have authority to tax? Which is an interesting question, and it was inevitable to come up. But I went down, you go down these rabbit holes of legal opinions, but there are basically two remedies that have not really been tried. The state has tried to overturn this since it was made 2 years ago, and they just lost almost at every turn. So, but the two areas are congressional action, and every single one of the rulings, both McGirt and all the ones that came before, says, in the absence of congressional direction, in the absence of Congress, which is basically saying, if you don't like our ruling, tell Congress to make a law. Don't like our ruling, tell Congress to act. The other suggestion is compacting, that the two nations, the state government and the nation, two sovereign governments, can come together and make an agreement. And that's been done with tobacco. It's been done with, hunting and fishing before it governors did away with that. And what compacts are just, it's an agreement that we will allow you to do something in our sovereign nation and we will share in the revenue. That's what it is. And that's the other way we can do that. That's not really been done. And so I wrote a column basically pointing that out. Like,
Yeah.
why can't we do that?
Well, if you think about it, let's take a look at the state income tax proposal here, what's being talked about. How hard would it be to make a compact between the tribe and the states where they both basically agree? It's like, yeah, you need the income tax of our tribal citizens to do stuff like, build roads and provide highway patrol coverage and fix bridges and all the other stuff that, keep schools going. Those are things that are mutually beneficial to the state and the tribes. I don't think that's that hard of a fix. Now, it does mean that we potentially have the possibility of having to do a lot of compacts. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
done before.
So what's the problem here? Just do it.
Right.
And I think that's something that the tribes have been trying to hint at for a long time. It's like, okay, we've got this thing here and we deserve our sovereignty that we were promised a long time ago, but we're willing to work with you, work with us. I think there's a willingness there to do that kind of a thing. Now, might there be some tribal government that says, oh yeah, my tribal citizens would love to not have to pay state income taxes. We're just not going to do that. That possibility exists, and that's kind of the Wild West side of this thing. But overall, I think it's a much more compelling argument to come to the table and work out these issues. Now, if you do with the congressional, I mean, that's kind of
it's never going to pass in Congress. It's
the nuclear option.
Well, right? I think because you have to get all of Congress to pass it, and I don't see Congress members in other states going along with. No one wants to de-establish a reservation. I mean, that's I don't see Congress doing that. So that's why I think compacting is the most natural avenue. And, one of the, it's interesting that, and I see the state arguing, tribal members in Oklahoma are also Oklahomans who are enjoying our roads and enjoying our public schools. So their argument is we want a fair and equitable system, but the tribal nations have sovereignty. And that's where I think they recognize their tribal members are also Oklahomans. And so leadership could happen if we could, I wish we would see it, sitting down. But another argument that has been made that for all of the complaints from the state officials about worries about taxation and paying their fair share, this comes on the backdrop of our state leaders wanting to cut every tax available, from groceries to income to, we are in a situation where I'm afraid we're going to cut back too much like we did before and end up in revenue failures. And so the tribal leaders are rightly asking, why are you so quick to tax our citizens when you're wanting to not tax your own? So there is a legitimate question there to ask.
Cuts for me, not for thee.
Exactly. So I would hope that people would get cooler heads will prevail and say, you know what, we can show leadership rather than leaving that up to the judges. Because right now everything's being decided in federal court. And and the state has not fared well there. So
imagine a world, just stick with me here. Imagine a world where a commission is made to look at compacting to deal with the McGirt issue of non-disestablished reservations in Oklahoma, and how we might possibly work through these things one issue at a time, made up of state leaders and tribal leaders and other people who might have some knowledge in these things.
Yes.
Whoa.
Oklahoma tribal issues. Yes. And so the last issue that won't go away, Bob, book banning. What is up with this book banning thing? John O'Connor, our attorney general, was going to investigate 50 books because he got complaints from the public who thought they were breaking obscenity laws, which means that they wanted to ban it for all Oklahomans, not just students, all Oklahomans. And that included Mice and Men, Lord of the Flies, Judy Blume's Forever, Perks of a Wallflower. I mean, the titles were things that we recognize. Quite a few LGBTQ biographies, issues of race. And so he was going to investigate that for obscenity laws. And then a day later, he backed off after that was reported, saying that there's a proposal in the legislature to deal with it, and that people could go to their school boards, or they could advocate their lawmakers to review the obscenity law or the definition of obscenity. Now, and I'm just like, I can't almost with anymore. But the proposal he was talking about is a bad proposal. It's the one from Senator Standridge that would take away due process in schools. And it would, if passed, any parent who made a complaint about a book, that book without due process would be removed. And if the librarian within 30 days doesn't remove it, he or she is fired, and the parents could sue the district for 10 grand a day for every day that's on. It's horrible. I mean, it's like, we depend on due process. Let's keep our due process systems in place. And the idea of definition of obscenity, right now, when I was looking at the obscenity laws, they're kind of focused on child porn and indecent exposure and things like that. So I don't know if we want to, I don't know how much you want to broaden that, but it's a hit at the First Amendment. I mean, no matter how you look at it,
it is.
No society has come out well that bans books.
Well, there's a ton of issues with this thing that I'm seeing. It's like we didn't learn anything from the whole Larry Flint episodes from years ago, and we,
it's just, I started thinking, cheekily, I started thinking about what is obscene, and I always put toxic masculinity up there. And so if that is obscene, then I could get rid of Hemingway. We could get rid of the beat poets and my hated Catcher the Rye. I fully admit I hate Catcher the Rye. So if toxic masculinity is obscene, we can get rid of that. So that's my pitch.
Well, here's another thing that I looked in with this. Aside from these strong First Amendment arguments and why are we just going to homogenize our literature? This whole $10,000 thing. It's like every new law that comes up where they're trying to enforce some sort of morality on someone, it comes up with this. And if you don't do it, the snitch is going to get you for a $10,000 a day fine. Now, I am old enough to remember, and maybe you are too.
We're about the same age.
About the same age. So you probably can recall this fun little fact. Fun little political policy fact that back in the day, the Republican Party, which rules our state, had a thing about this 2-word term, frivolous lawsuits. Our courts are jammed up with frivolous lawsuits, hot coffee from McDonald's. Oh my gosh, someone lost a bunch of money and this and that, and people are suing for everything, for it's costing businesses, it's costing this and costing that. And now we are basically giving an incentive to anybody out there who wants to get paid and, stick it to whoever, 10 grand. How do we get here? How did we get to this spot? That's what I wanted. What's up with this $10,000 a day thing? So it's in these book bans, it's in this, CRT stuff, it's in the abortion laws that are coming out. It's like in everything. It's like, okay, why are we doing this? What's up with all of this litigation now? We're going to basically beat people into submission with the courts. Conservatives, wherefore art thou? Save us from all of this frivolous lawsuit legislation that's getting ready to run us over. Help. Please help.
I know. Well, usually at this point we're lightening up the conversation and we come up with something fun. And I don't know if either of us are in a fun mood right now. We've got wars, we've got book banning, we've got handshake problems. I mean, just the world just doesn't seem bleak. So I'm sure next week will be better, right?
I'll throw a few things at you. It's getting warmer outside.
There you go.
Next week looks really spring-like and nice, at least for a few days.
Be slushy with the mud, but okay.
A little bit, yeah, but it'll dry out. It'll get windy and it'll dry out. There are, and from my world, new trails have opened up at Turkey Mountain that are very nice. You should go visit them when they're not muddy. And March Madness is coming.
It's true.
I
gotta get I love doing a bracket. I pay no attention to basketball, and I love the bracket season.
Bracketology is upon us all. So those are some things we can look forward to as to keep our minds off the pending doom from World War III and lingering pandemic and lawsuits, book banning, and
you know what? In March Madness, I bet they shake hands.
They will.
They will shake hands, and I will praise that. So on that, I think we're going to end this for this week, and thank everybody for listening. And be sure to email us, send us letters, send us op-ed ideas, submissions. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to know what you want us to talk about as well, because we'll pretty much talk about anything.
And follow Tulsa World on Facebook and Twitter.
Exactly.
And you can follow Tulsa World Opinion on Twitter as well.
All right. With that, we'll talk next week. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye.